The serpentine line, again, is one of those designs that fits a variety of sizes and shapes, which are great for sampler quilts when you have all those different blocks. I especially like it in narrow borders or more rectangular shaped blocks. I'm going to talk through a little bit of some samples and then show you how to draw it out, and then we're going to actually get to the quilting. So this is the design that we're working with. Now in this example, I just have some quilted lines in which I'm quilting that serpentine line within. And that's a great application of the design to use in negative space or bigger areas of your quilt. But you don't have to stick with it in blocks. In this quilted sample, I'm showing how you can combine it with other quilting designs. So here I have some nice wavy lines, some ribbon candy, and then I'm just using that serpentine line to fill in the space below. What's great about it is it works in irregular shapes as well. So if you have any wedge type shape blocks or something like that, this design will easily fit the wider and the more narrow. So here's an example of it quilted in a border. So we have that gentle S shape that goes from edge to edge. And so since it's a little bit easier to get the idea of it when you see it visually, I'm going to draw it out before we start quilting. I've got my template plastic or whatever plexiglass, and you could use that to audition the designs. But basically this design works from edge to edge. So you need either the seams of your block or a previously quilted line to use. And what I'm going to do is from one edge of my block, or whatever area I'm working with, I'm going to quilt a gentle S line that comes down, changes direction, and runs into the other side of the area. Now if you notice, this line looks like it's merging into the seam. I'm not coming in at an angle, I'm making it look as though it eventually would run right along that seam. Then I'm coming right back up, echoing that shape until I run into the other side. Now as you're quilting this line, I want you to think about what this looks like to you, because if you can put a word picture or analogy to it, it'll be a lot easier for you to quilt. For me, I like to think of it as an S shape, kind of working back and forth. But I know that some people like to think of it as like the sides of a fern or a vine, that you're imagining that this side is like the spine or the stem, and that these are just the leaves coming out. But no matter what analogy you're giving it, you just want to make sure you run into that edge of the quilt and then come back down and echoing. Now let's go ahead and quilt it out, and I'll give you some tips to make you even more successful with that design. Now on the sampler quilt, if you're quilting along with us, one thing that you could do is pick where you want to quilt this. Now I'm going to put it in this border right here just because that seems to work well for demonstrating it, but you could try it in, the larger triangles or any of those areas. Now as I'm working my way down, again, I'm going from side to side. I'm going to come down a little bit, make my S shape, and then make it look like it's running into that other seam. I'm going to come back up and echo that shape, make it look like it's merging into that other seam. And I'm just working my way down. Now how far you angle down that line is completely up to you. If you want them to be more vertical or have them go down more to angle, that's fine. You can make them further apart or closer depending on your preferences. But the one thing I would try if you're trying to make them look something like this is just to make sure that you're running in that seam. You're not so much stopping and traveling along, you're just kind of tucking it in and then coming right back out. So I'm kind of running into that seam and then coming right back out, working my way down. Now what happens if you get going and you feel like, I don't know where I'm going, I'm kind of stuck? Just pause, take a moment and look, and maybe even use your finger to trace out the next step. Sometimes just showing your brain where you need to go next is what will help you get you on the right track. So here I would know, oh, I need to come back up here and merge it into that other seam. So let's do that. Another thing that might happen is what happens if you're making your serpentine lines, you're working your way down. What happens instead of merging that you come in the wrong angle like that? So instead of making it look like it's going right into that seam, it's coming in at an angle. That's not going to set your next one up right. So what you'll do is just fix it, don't rip it out. Nobody became a better quilter by ripping out their quilting. I would just travel down a little bit and then just get on the right track for the next one. There you go. Now there will be a little bobble there, but trust me, nobody's going to point out your mistakes. If they do, they're not your friend. Or they're your best friend, so there's that. But all I can say is if you're using that third color that blends in, you're not going to see those little bobbles, and it's going to look just fine. Then you're going to work your way back and forth, quilting your way down the area, and have that nice kind of serpentine shape And it also kind of stabilizes the seams as you go. So if you didn't feel like stitching in the ditch, that kind of holds that area down for you there. Now let's talk about the swirl hook, a variation of a swirl design that works great in all those little corners of sampler quilts. Now we're going to move from the serpentine line to the swirl hook. Now what makes this swirl variation great for sampler quilts is that little hook that fits great into those irregular spaces. So think about quilts like stars or blocks that have weird angles. It could really help you get into there and make sure your quilting is consistent as possible. Now once you master this design, it also works well in blocks. And here in this quilt you can see in these diamond-shaped blocks I've quilted that same swirl with the hook pulling it all the way to the point and then coming back. So just a really fun variation that allows you to quilt that whole area, and I'm going to show you how to quilt it right now. So on your sampler quilt, you can quilt this wherever you'd like. I'm going to go ahead and work within this space so you can kind of see how it goes together. Now I want you to remember in the class materials there's a sketch of this design. And the reason I say that is that when I teach this, some students have a little bit of trouble getting that hook to go out. And I think if you just trace along, you'll quickly see that it's not as hard as it might look. So when we're starting the design, the first thing we're doing is quilting a nice curl or a swirl that goes into itself. Now normally you would finish that swirl and come all the way back around. But before we do that, we're going to quilt a line that kind of swings out to a point, almost like that serpentine line that we just learned. So you do your swirl out to a point, and then you're just going to come right back, echo back, but you're not going to run into that first swirl that you quilted, and then you're going to finish it around. And it's going to look something like this. So just to talk through it real quick, the swirl going into the center, then you're going to swing out. It doesn't matter how long you make that hook, just depending on the space that you're trying to fill. You're going to echo back just a little bit and then finish your swirl. So just like a regular swirl, you're just adding that one extra step, but it's going to really help you get in and fill that area. Now when you're working with any kind of meander, whether it's a swirl or feather or really anything, the one thing you want to remember is that you can use echoing to move yourself around the area as well. So let's go ahead real quick and quilt another swirl. This one I might have come out to this way. There's my swirl. I'm going to go ahead and quilt my hook. I have a little bit of gap in the quilting, so I'm just going to use the hook to kind of fit in there, out to a point, back, and then finish that swirl. Now when you're quilting these on your quilts, the one thing that I will suggest is don't worry too much about keeping the swirls the same size. Focus more on keeping the spacing between the lines as consistent as you can. Now, I also said that echoing is a great way to move yourself around the quilt. So if you need to echo around something you already quilted to get to a different area of the quilt, then do that. You don't want to have to start and stop. So let me see, I'll go ahead and throw another swirl here, go out to a hook, come back. And the more you do this, the more you'll find kind of your style of quilting. Now if you're struggling with filling the area inconsistently, let's say you're working in a block and you just can't figure out how to deal with those corners, one thing that you can do is practice sketching this out. If you draw a square and practice drawing it, filling in those areas, that will really come in handy when it comes time to quilting. So again, you're going to swirl, add your hook, and then finish your swirl. You can use that echoing to move you around the quilt. And try to fill in that space as consistently as you can.